Hey, friends, this is Pop Culture Makes Me Jealous, where we discuss pop culture through the lens of race or gender, and sometimes both. I'm your host, Julia Washington, and on today's show, my guest, Maggie Frank Shu, is here, and we will be talking about the 1980s classic Breakfast Club. Hues by Jules offers custom artwork and original prints, specializing in watercolor, focusing on the human form and different shades of skin. If you're looking for that perfect gift for a birthday or have a special memory you'd like to commemorate, visit Hues by Jules on Instagram or find the Etsy shop of the same name. That's Hues, Hues by Jules, Juls. Breakfast Club was released February 15th, 1985, and was written and directed by John Hughes, starring Emilio Esteves, Molly Ringwald, Judd Nelson, Ali Sheedy, and Anthony Michael Hall. This movie is one that is listed as John Hughes' greatest films. But before we dive into our discussion, let me introduce you to my guest. Maggie Frank Shu is an author and a book coach who helps first-time authors pinpoint their biggest ideas and turn them into published books. She has always been a writer and started her career in journalism, earning a master's degree from the Columbia School of Journalism in New York and working for national magazines like Gourmet, Martha Stewart, and ESPN The Magazine. Maggie's goals in her life and work is to help as many people as possible tell their story. She published her first book, Be About Something, to help people who've always wanted to write a book but don't know where to start. You can get her first chapter, Be About Something, for free on her website. And friends, we're going to link in the show notes for you so you can get to it easily if you're interested. Welcome to the show, Maggie.
Wow, thank you so much, Julia.
I'm excited you're here. And
as I was getting
to know you a little bit better, I realized we have a lot of things in common. British television, love for Denzel Washington.
Oh my God, how do you even know that about me? I'm obsessed. That was my first crush.
I love that. We used to joke and be like, we think Denzel's a long lost family member.
Oh God, I mean, we should do, and did you see, anyway, I don't know, but do you follow Phoebe Robinson? She does like Thirsty Thursdays, and this Thursday was Denzel.
Yes.
I watched it. Anyway, I'm a big Denzel fan. That's true.
Okay, friends, we're going to do a quick summary of Breakfast Club in case it's been a while since you've seen this movie. 5 high school students from different social status are stuck doing Saturday morning detention. Each suffering their own misunderstood identities, the group battles the power-hungry principal, all the while opening up and sharing what it's like to be who they are beyond perception. At the time of its release, The Hollywood Reporter had this to say: "The Breakfast Club deserves credit for venturing beyond the formulaic, timid patterns of most youth movies." Writer-director John Hughes, who has demonstrated a blazing satirical sense of middle America in past work, provides some savvy social and personal insights in the film. So I want to start at the very beginning. What is it about this movie that you love?
When you said you wanted to do Breakfast Club, I really wanted to be a guest because it was sort of a formative movie for me. I saw it when I was 7 on VHS at a friend's house, and I cannot believe I watched it that young, but it had a huge impact on me. But I would say, so as the things I love about this movie, even now, and back then as well, even when I was 7, the kind of realness around like adults as the enemy. So like the principal in the movie is just so out of touch. And even when he's mean and cruel, and that is definitely the way that kids saw teachers back then, is just sort of like, we have our own lives and then like we have to do what they say, but they really don't know us. And that all like felt like really relevant and felt like really true back then. And even now, like I look at that movie and I don't know that there are a lot of other directors that captured that so well. I also love there's a couple more things. So one is that I love that, like, his take on class. I know we're going to talk about how homogenous this movie is in terms of race and even gender, but, you know, his take on class, you know, the popular kids in his movies are always rich. And I feel like that's a really great insight, you know, like a lot of other movies, the popular kids are cool. Like, why are they cool? In his movies, they're cool because they have like the right clothes, the right cars, and they have all those things because they have money. And I think that that's real, you know, compared to like a lot of other kind of teen fare. Yeah, so I mean, there's other things too, but like I think those things are like still really stand out for me.
Yeah.
Feels like a more real take on life.
Yeah, he's been credited as being sort of the one who creates this space for teens to be teens and seen as teens,
Yeah,
you know, on film. And I forgot, so I listened to Rob Lowe's Stories I Only Tell My Friends, which came out in 2011. I did audiobook because he read it himself. And I was like, okay, I want to listen to Rob Lowe talk to me for 8 hours. Yes, please. And it's really interesting. I forgot about The Outsiders, and Rob Lowe brings up how The Outsiders was really big in sort of breaking down that whole, you know, teens playing teens. They weren't quite teenager, but he was, but like Emilio and Patrick Swayze and Tom Cruise were all kind of in their early 20s, but still they were young and, you know, not 30-year-olds playing teenagers.
Right, like in Grease or something.
Yes. Or even I watched The Birdcage the other day, and Callista Flockhart's playing a 19-year-old, and in reality she was like 30 or something like that.
That's funny.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. Yeah, that definitely feels real. And I mean, like, you know, they feel young, but like it's not just like how they look, it's also just their concerns and like what they're thinking about, like the clique, you know, sort of like, I mean, when we get into it, like we'll talk more about, but like how they're all coming from these different cliques in school, or this hierarchy where Molly Ringwald's character is at the top, and also Emilio Estevez's character, because he's a jock, and then everybody else kind of falls underneath that. And that is extremely, like, that is so totally what you're obsessed with when you're a teenager. I mean, I'm sure some people had, you know, alternate experiences of high school, but that was my exact experience, was that you were in your group and you didn't really come outside of your group. And I think actually what I love about this movie is that you do, like, it is the other way it's realistic is like, there were like a few like moments in high school where, let's say you and like some person from another clique were like stuck together at like something, like an event at another school, and it's just somebody you would never talk to, but it's the only person you know. And so you start talking to them and you're like, oh, this person's actually like a whole human being, like not just Miss Popular or not just Miss Jock or whatever. And then when you go back to school, like you never talk to them again, you know, because now you have, like, you know what I mean? And so like, I feel like that's another, it's their ages and how they look in the movie, but it's also like what they are obsessed with and like the way they think about their lives. It's very realistic.
Yeah, Claire very clearly is at that. There's that point in the movie where Claire's very like realistic about it. Like, you think we're all going to talk to each other on Monday? Probably not.
Right.
And then the rest of the group's kind of like, oh, stop being a, you know, they straight up call her a bitch. Stop being a bitch about it. And like all these things. And she's like, I'm not wrong. Like, Andy, you know, I'm right. You think you're going to talk to, I forget what Anthony Michael Hall's character's name is. Brian, you think you're going to talk to Brian if he comes up and says hi to you? No, you're going to say hi, and then he's going to walk away, and then you're going to shred him so you get your street cred back.
Right.
And that just felt so honest.
Yeah. Although then it's all punctured because I think like what the movie says at the very end, and I noticed this because I just watched it, the last 5 minutes, literally the last 5 minutes is when they couple up. And like, so then the idea is that they are going to break down this social structure at school because Claire's dating Bender and Andy's dating Ali Sheedy's character. And so I feel like they're so honest, and they have this great like play, like they're in a play, like scenes from a play kind of dialogue. And then at the end, it's sort of like this fantasy. I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Yeah. We can dive into that in a little bit too.
Yeah.
John Hughes is often praised as a writer-director who changed the course of the teenage narrative in films, as we mentioned. His movies center around teen themes from a teen perspective. He layers in his own nostalgia for adolescence while considering the modern day teen experience. In Breakfast Club, he brings together 5 kids from varying social sects who learn and grow from each other. But we never know if come Monday, they remain in their newly discovered state of understanding. The chemistry between the cast is crucial to the success of the characters. There are a few articles circulating that include the fun fact that Nicolas Cage and John Hughes were considered for the roles before hiring Judd Nelson. So I want to talk about performance. This movie essentially creates, it's not the main creation of the Brat Pack, but they become affiliated with the Brat Pack of the 1980s. And as we mentioned a little bit ago, they kind of couple up at the end. But all that to say, do you think the movie still would have worked if there was a Nicolas Cage or a John Cusack had been cast in that role of Bender? Because I can't personally picture John Cusack as Bender. He doesn't seem like he has the cruel vibe that Bender had.
Yeah, no, not at all. And if you think about like his other, I'm a pretty big fan. I haven't watched everything he's ever done, but like his other movies, like even from that time period, he's always playing like, well, say anything. I mean, he's always like very romantic. And I feel like Judd Nelson, and this is what I really remember from when I was 7 as well, is like the way that his nose flares.
Yes.
Like his nostrils flare when he gets really mean and nasty. Like, I think like Nicolas Cage probably would have had a better chance. But also I think, I don't know. What do you think about Nicolas Cage?
He's hit or miss for me. Like I loved him in Gone in 60 Seconds. There's like a handful of movies that I love him in, and I always forget he's part of the Coppola family, but he just has this sort of Keanu vibe to me, but like if Keanu was sinister.
What was the movie where he played a Valley Girl? Yeah. He's very, like Bill and Ted kind of. If they're from different eras, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not like I think like maybe he seems like off because he does tend to like dominate in some of the movies that he's in and be like the center. And this works better, I think, because all of them, although Bender's like, I feel like Bender and Claire kind of compete for being the main character in the movie. And I think like Judd Nelson does have a way of like, being in the ensemble and not taking over.
Yeah. He definitely has a lot of some of the crucial scenes too, where I was watching very closely this time, and I still can't remember after they're wandering the halls. I'm still looking at this going, why did they leave the library again altogether? I just can't, for whatever reason, keep that in my head.
When they almost get caught, you mean? Because they go to Bender's locker and he gets his weed.
Oh, that's right. Because he shoves it in Anthony Michael Hall's pants.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, we could talk about favorite character now, actually, because for all of Bender's issues that we'll get into in a little bit, because he really this time around made me a little bit more uncomfortable than in previous times I've watched it. They all have a really, like, they all had to be who they are in order for this to work in my mind. And if Bender was dialed back in any way, shape, or form, I don't know if it would have worked, but it's still, he feels icky sometimes. I don't know. I'm like complicated.
He is icky. I think like, what I was going to say, a couple things about like, in terms of, I don't know if I have a favorite character, actually. I feel like what I noticed in this viewing, like watching it a couple days ago, is that the bonding that happens between them is really well done. Like, it's not like, like in one scene, it's like every scene, like a little more kind of like, even because it's really after lunch that they start talking and really getting to know each other. But like, even like there's a part where early on where they all fall asleep. And then what's the principal's name? Forget his name. His first name's Dick. I know that, but where he comes in and there's also like all the things that kind of have to happen. So like Bender, the library door is open at first, but then Bender breaks the door so that it has to stay shut. And so that kind of gets them a little bit more bonded, because they don't tattletale on Bender. Like they don't know, they kind of, this is another thing that's so realistic about high school life, is like, they're all fighting. And then when the adult comes in, they all close ranks and they're like all, you know, none of them are going to tell the adult what happened. And then there's another scene early on where they're all asleep because they're so bored, which is another thing, like not having any electronics or any kind of, you know, nothing is on them really besides like paper.
Yeah.
And they don't even read any books in the library, or they kind of look at magazines sometimes, but they get so bored and they fall asleep. And then the principal comes in and he's like, who has to use the lavatory? And they all raise their hands without opening their eyes, you know? Yeah. And like, that just cracked me up so much. It's just like little things that make them like more and more like together against the world. And I really love that. I feel like, yeah, if I had to pick a favorite character, I would say Andy, actually.
Yeah.
I had a big crush on him, but I also think like Emilio Estevez's performance is really undersung because like he has to be like such a straight arrow. And then like, you know, I mean, Judd Nelson's got like all this sort of scenery chewing stuff to do. And then the geek is like geeky and he kind of has to like hold this very like boring middle ground. And I feel like he's actually pretty interesting and does a good job. So
yeah, there's a couple of scenes that kind of drive me crazy. I'm with you on the whole Andy thing. Like I definitely had a crush on Emilio Estevez as Andy. It's just like, you're cute, sporto.
He's so cute.
There's the idea that you can't do anything during detention. Like you're not allowed to study, you're not allowed to do like anything. And that's so mind-blowing to me. And I think that this is like a thing in the 80s. I can't remember the 90s. Sometimes I can't remember some details about the 90s, but I remember when I got detention, we were allowed to do
I know. I mean, actually, like this principal, he is so sadistic. And that's another thing I really like about this movie is that like, I mean, he is just like Bender. Sometimes you feel sympathy for, never for the principal. I mean, he is just so like, he's just doesn't think of kids as people. He's always yelling at them, on your feet, you know, and like, you know, he's so mean. And you know, when he locks Bender in the closet, I feel like that turns to abuse.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, he's abusive several times, but the whole thing, and like the first scene, they get to school at 7, I think. So the detention is like 7 to 4. That's crazy. Like 9 hours you're gonna have detention for people. And like Claire cut class. That, I mean, maybe she cut several times and that's why they're fine, but this is like a really harsh punishment. So I feel and
it doesn't seem like a harsh enough punishment for Anthony Michael Hall's character because he brings a weapon to school.
Yes. Or really for Andy either. I mean, when you find out finally what Andy did, he basically assaulted. I mean, he could have been like criminally charged for what he did. So it's such a strange, I mean, and then like, I mean, there's a lot of plot holes in this movie. You can't think too hard. Like in the whole second half of the movie, like the principal never comes back. And it's because he's down in the basement talking to the janitor, but like, it's a little bit thin of an idea that like they're all going to smoke pot together, like that much pot for that long and not get caught.
Right. Principal Vernon.
Vernon.
Yeah. And then you see him with the janitor. I forget the janitor's name too, but
Carl.
he knows Brian, and they kind of have, and that's never ever, I don't think that's
he's
ever
a scene stealer. I love the janitor.
Yeah.
I didn't remember him.
Yeah.
He's only got like 2 scenes and they're very memorable.
Yeah, definitely. Modesto Reads is a community on Instagram highlighting what people in the city of Modesto, California are reading. If you want book recommendations, or if you live in the city of Modesto, follow Modesto Reads and use the hashtag Modesto Reads. Since its release, the world has changed a lot. Serious criticism of John Hughes' work has been circulating since at least 2015, maybe even sooner, but it's become more publicly in the last handful of years. And Molly Ringwald herself has written about her time and experience during this era. In Ringwald's now famous essay in The New Yorker, she specifically addresses the scene in which Bender is under the table. He is hiding from the principal. Claire is, because at this point he's been sent in exile and he snuck back. That's why he's hiding under the table for our friends at home who may not remember why. There's a shot of this view under the table, which then cuts to Claire appearing to kick Bender while he's still hiding. Ringwald writes this: "What's more, as I can see now, Bender sexually harasses Claire throughout the film. When he's not sexualizing her, he takes out his rage on her with vicious contempt, calling her pathetic, mocking her as Queenie. It's rejection that inspires his vitriol. Claire acts dismissively toward him, and in his pivotal scene near the end, she predicts that at school on Monday morning, even though the group has bonded, things will return, we mentioned this earlier, return socially to the status quo. Just bury your head in the sand and wait for your fucking prom, Bender yells. He never apologizes for any of it, but nevertheless, he gets the girl in the end, which I actually kind of forgot about a little bit, but we'll dive into that right now. In the article, Ringwald shares that an older actress is hired for the scene, but she and her mother are still embarrassed by it. So I want to talk about that scene a little bit and Bender overall towards Claire, because it's a lot. So how do you think the representation of this relationship impacted you as a young person and then now as an adult?
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, the first, especially in the beginning, I mean, it's bad all throughout, but I was watching this with my husband and he was like, this movie has not aged well. Like he was really offended. And I was too, but I was like, gonna watch the whole thing. I mean, I think we would have turned it off, or he would have turned it off. The one thing, and I remember not understand. So, and I don't know if I've seen this movie several times, but I just have a really strong memory of the first time I watched it when I was 7 in my neighbor's bedroom on her little VHS. And, I remember when he was saying like torturing her about whether she was a virgin, right?
Yes.
And this comes up twice in the movie,
yeah,
where they're all like kind of really, really, it's so inappropriate. Like they're, if kind of asking, I mean, basically like accusing her of being a slut and a prude at the same time.
right.
And like, there's no other possibility, like there's no other possible way for her to be. And it just never occurs to her to be like, to like kind of just not take it, I mean, she sort of seems like she buys into it all. So, but I mean, I'm not blaming her. Yeah. I would say, yeah. And also like, okay, so back to him. I mean, he's really unforgivable. I think like I think it's Judd Nelson's performance that kind of saves it. Like, because there's like a part where Bender's making fun of Brian and like, is like, protect, like kind of like doing like his impression of Brian's house where like, hey dad, hey son, and let's go fishing and stuff. And then he does his impression of his own house, which is like his dad beating him up.
Yeah.
And then he shows everyone that he has a cigarette burn on his arm. And then when he runs, like he gets really mad and then he like leaves the group and goes and sits on the stairs. And he looks really, I mean, he looks like a kid there. Like he looks really pained and like he doesn't understand what's going on. And so I kind of felt like, although I think that excuses nothing about his behavior, like I felt that the character was written a little bit, like, he's bad, he is vicious, but he's like written in a way where you can empathize with him a little bit, instead of like what I said about Vernon, who's just like always cruel, always sadistic, and there's really nothing redeeming about him,
Yeah. I had a hard time with Bender because the whole time he's just antagonizing Claire and it's just so awkward and it's so uncomfortable and it just makes me like cringe and just feel for her. And then, the whole scene with him under the bench really bothered me. I thought, how that's interesting. I'm surprised that made it into, that sort of scenario made it into the movie just generally when you think about the 80s, but then a lot of stuff that was like Porky's and all these other movies that came out.
Well, that's what, yeah. And when I read Molly Ringwald's article too, it's like she does, in that New Yorker article, she does contextualize, like he wrote for National Lampoon. I mean, and I remember those movies from that time as well, like all like the National Lampoon movies, like the vacation movies, there's all kinds of weird stuff with like buxom 16-year-olds. And there's I mean, there's so many, there's Porky's is like that. There's Revenge of the Nerds is like that.
Yeah.
There's Fletch, like anything Chevy Chase was in.
Yeah.
is pretty much like gross and weird.
Yeah.
Including Caddyshack. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah. And I have more, but go ahead. It's your turn. Go ahead. What were you?
No, it's okay. But it just, so I like have this complicated relationship because like you say, Judd Nelson's performance is so good. So on the one hand, you're just like, this is a terrible human. And I feel like you're representative of all of this sort of, not to completely generalize, but you can kind of draw a line with some of the terrible people that who, or not terrible people, some of the people that we've seen come to existence who behave in such horrific ways. And then you can kind of see similarities between them and Bender. And then that empathetic tone of like, he does come from a really bad house, and he does have literally nobody is rooting for him. They literally do not care if he survives. Like the principal clearly states, like, you're going to end up in jail. It's fine. Nobody cares. And even early on, Andy says, like, you're nothing. Nobody cares about you. So he's constantly getting that affirmation that he doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But also he channels it in a way where he just takes it in and then gives it right back out. And he's zeroed in on Claire for this particular movie. And I just had a really hard time with that, because I just wanted him to be like, I want an adult to come to him and say like, hey man, you're not trash. You could potentially have a future if you like wanted to. You're not trash. And that just isn't going to happen for him. That just didn't happen for him. And then in the end, when Claire does come to him after him treating like garbage the whole time, and they end up like having that moment in the closet where I was just like, 20 years ago, I was like, oh, so sweet. Now I'm like, girl, come on. Do we need to do this? Like, this isn't I don't like this anymore. And then he even pulls the card of like, wouldn't it be great to drive your parents crazy to bring me home?
Right.
Like, yes and no. I'm conflicted.
Yeah. I mean, I think that and she says this in the article too, and I totally felt this, where she said, like, in real life, Molly Ringwald, like, it had only been like 10 years ago, like, so when she was well into her 30s, where she stopped thinking that bad boys were more interesting than nice men, she said something like that. And that's definitely resonated with me. Like, I noticed that pattern in my early dating life until I got therapy. But I think like it wasn't because of this movie. Like, there's so much in the air about like, men and pursuit, and like how men show you that they like you or are interested in you. And like, also this is touched on in the movie where it's like, he talks about her using sex as a weapon. And I feel like for me, it was kind of gross, because I know in real life, like, he was 25 and she was 16 or 15. So that's really gross. But he had this like conversation, or like, he's berating her and telling her that she uses it to get respect, or to, and I think that there's no question that if you don't, if I was watching this as a teen, I wouldn't have enough of a critical eye to where, or like, I think teens need to watch this movie with adults. That, I mean, no teens are going to want to watch any movies with adults, but I think, I don't know, that the other thing I wanted to bring up was that, and it's sort of like, but one thing that kind of came to mind was like, we see all this stuff of Molly Ringwald kind of like wringing her hands and thinking like, what have I contributed to the culture? And so I Googled, and I wanted to see like if Judd Nelson had ever said how he felt about this role now. And I found the first result I didn't like look that hard, but he had done an interview in 2019 with like the local newspaper in Wilmington, North Carolina. So like, not like, the New Yorker, but because he was going to do a play there. Anyway, they asked him about it, and he was like, basically like, it was horrible response. Like, he used his male privilege, where he was just kind of like, well, I don't see what Molly sees, and it's classic, and you can't really hold an old movie to like modern standards. And that was what he said. And I don't agree with Molly, he said. And like, that really made me so disappointed, because 2019 is well after Me Too. Yeah. And like, I feel like so many people in positions of privilege do this. Like, white people do this all the time also, where it's like Black people or people of color are like, bring something up, and then a white person's like, well, I don't understand why, I don't get it. Like, that doesn't offend me. And it's like, okay, well, I kind of heard the same thing in his response, where it was like, oh, well, that doesn't bother me, and I'm proud of it. And it's like, okay, well, but you're the man, you're like, I guess it's like your privilege, leaning on your privilege to do that, and not to really interrogate it at all.
And it's interesting too, because then again, the burden is on Molly Ringwald to justify it and to clarify it and to be in it. And he's not like, I love that you went down that road, because now I'm thinking, gosh, I don't know if anyone other than Molly Ringwald has spoken about their time working with John Hughes.
I thought it was weird in the New Yorker that she didn't interview the other cast members. Like, did she ask them and they said no, or like they just didn't, because she interviewed, it was anyway. So, but yeah, I felt like if any, I mean, I don't think Judd Nelson himself is like, needs to be held accountable.
Right.
I mean, he's playing a character, not held accountable as if it was real life, but kind of like she's holding herself accountable, like being like, what have I contributed to the culture by participating in this? And then like, no one else in the movie feels like they need to say anything. I don't know. That was weird to me.
Yeah, I agree. And you bring up a really good point there, because again, we're just putting that burden on this woman who is a teenager, who is trying to get who is in acting, to have the whole sole responsibility of explaining away, or not explaining away, but the burden of John Hughes canon. Which isn't fair. And granted, she's been called his muse, and he always wanted her for the Breakfast Club, and then they kind of used her in 16 Candles as sort of a test run, if you will, and all of these things. But still, there's so many characters that exist that are like Bender, that there has to be, you have to, as an actor, and I've talked about this on the show in other episodes, like I was cast as, and for people who are new to the show, I'm biracial. I have a Black parent and a white parent, well, Italian, but whatever. And so when I was doing theater, I got cast as the mean white lady who yelled at Rosa Parks on the bus, and it messed with my head. And it was just really, really hard to continue to play that role. Granted, we didn't have a long run of the show. We only did 3 shows, and then we did a school tour, but rehearsal time, all of it. So now, like, I feel whenever anybody brings it up, and I'm publicly out and proud as a biracial woman, I guess you could say, when people bring it up, it's a conversation I'm willing to engage in with them. It was just like, this is how it affected me playing that role, so let's, if it affected you, let's talk about it. And I'm like nobody in comparison to Judd Nelson. So I find it interesting when actors who play sort of, these problematic characters are unwilling to discuss it. Even Lakeith Stanfield, who played the guy in Judas and the Black Messiah, which is a great film.
Oh yeah.
He even talked about how hard it was to play that character. And it just how difficult it was at the end of shooting, and he really got into a deep, dark place. So it's hard for me. Like, I think that I don't know, you almost have to examine your participation in what's happening, especially when it's a pop culture thing, because, and I don't know if they didn't realize that Breakfast Club would be huge and John Hughes would have the impact in pop culture in the way that he has at the time. But I think taking a little responsibility in that is really important, because you've just influenced literally 3 generations.
Yeah. But he absolutely doesn't have to. I mean, that's male privilege. It's white male privilege. I mean, he doesn't have to. I mean, and he's not, I mean, he sort of says, like, he said something, you should look it up, but he said something like, we all live in the shadow of John Hughes, almost like it was really not up to me, or kind of, but like, yeah, I feel like, he doesn't have to. He doesn't feel like he has to. He's like, that was then. And yeah, I mean, you should look at the quote, because then he says, like, were the framers of the Constitution supposed to know? And it's like, yeah, kind of. They weren't supposed to know that they're on stolen land. And I mean, like, that's kind of like a really oversimplistic write-off and a weird comparison to make. That's kind of what he said, just nothing. Yeah. But I feel like white men and, men and anyone in a position of privilege gets away with stuff like that all the time.
Yeah.
And I also there was something else I wanted to say about, well, 2 other things. One was the other thing that endears him, because we're making him sound like, I just want to point out that, like, he is really, like, you do feel kind of empathy with him, because like when they sneak out of the library to go get his weed, and they're about to get caught by Vernon, and what does he do? He tells them, you all go that way, and I'm gonna he lures Vernon away, and he's the only one that gets in trouble. And he does that for them. And like, I feel like, that's the moment where you're like, oh, this guy is like, I don't have like a good sense of, like, why does he do that for them? Right. Like, they could have all gotten in trouble. He protects them all. And then Vernon gets so mad at him because he runs to the gym and he's like shooting hoops and stuff. And then he locks him in the closet, which is so abusive. Vernon's worse. I think that helps with like having empathy for Bender.
Yeah.
And then he says all these things, and he says, you know, I'm going to find you in 5 years and I'm going to beat the shit out of you. I mean, the principal actually says that to him. And the look on his face, again, I feel like his performance is so good because like the look on his face, he turns immediately into like, he really looks 15. He really looks scared. He really looks like a child. He really looks like he's being abused, and it's really painful to watch. So I think like looking at his performance as a commentary about like, you know, this cliche, like hurt people, like that he is always being abused, what you said earlier. I feel like then you kind of have more, you just have like, I don't know, you can't just be like, fuck that guy and write him off completely.
It's what all the principals, that's what the principals did. That's what the teachers did. That's what everybody else did. And he showed you that he is sort of savable, if you will.
Yeah.
Which I'd like to think that his relationship with Claire does go beyond Saturday, and he does get a little redemption and does better with his life.
I don't think so. But I mean, one other thing I wanted to say. Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, this might be too much, but I was Googling, or I was looking at Emilio Estevez's IMDb page because I was like, you know, he was in Young Guns. I forgot how like popular he was in the 80s. And he was in this other movie that I saw when I was like 10, which was also inappropriate. I saw it on video, and it was called Stakeout, and it was him and Richard Dreyfuss were the stars. And have you ever seen it? Have you heard of it? Stakeout. So I only saw
and
it back
I love
then,
Richard
so
Dreyfuss.
I have a very sketchy, well, you don't want to, this movie is like the definition of not aging well. So the premise of this movie is that they're two cops, they're partners, Richard Dreyfuss and Emilio Esteves, and there's a really bad criminal who's on the lam or something, and they stake out the criminal's girlfriend's apartment, and they can kind of see through her blinds because they're like in an abandoned building across the street. And so they're basically stalking this woman without her knowledge as police officers, which is like the thin, you know, like premise of like why they're allowed to do this. But they stalk her, and they like see her undressed, and they see her like in, you know, I mean, she has her windows open, so her, you know, anyone can look in. But anyway, but that whole idea of that movie now is so horrifying. Like they sexualize her, and one of them ends up dating her without telling her that they're also staking her out. I don't remember what happens, but I do remember, like, I just think like now, for that to be the premise of a major motion picture, even if it was probably like critically panned or whatever, but like for that movie to even get made, like there was definitely different mores back then. But you know, you know, for what it's worth.
Yeah, Rob Lowe talks a lot about that in his book. It was actually a really interesting read because he does kind of, you got this sense because he and Emilio and all these guys are all hanging out in Malibu together, living their best life in the 80s. And you really get the sense from the book that he was a little reserved in some of his storytelling. Like there's more to the story than what he's sharing. So now I'm just like, please have written the true stories that we will get at some point in life, like when everyone's dead or something, because I'm dying to know. Because when he talks about St. Elmo's Fire, which came out the same year, and that always blows my mind because Ali Sheedy is in it as well, but they're playing young adults. And then, you know, 6 months earlier, whenever the release was, they were in high school. So whatever you want to there. But where was I going with this? Oh, like Rob Lowe was talking about how everyone's sort of like coupled up, but he was very polite in the way that he talked about people sort of bonding together. And he did make it sound like it really was innocent, but it was sort of implied that it wasn't.
Okay.
So now I'm just like, what's the real story? Can we get an E Hollywood behind the movie for Breakfast Club, please? Or St. Elmo's Fire, please. We have talked about how we were both probably a little too young to watch this movie at the time when we saw it. Last night when I was sitting down to watch it, I said to my son, oh, you want to watch this with me? Have you seen it before? Because, you know, he's in high school now, he's a senior, and I'm thinking we can have actual conversations about things. And I'm like, this is probably bad. And we can really dissect those things. He goes, Mom, I've already seen it. I'm like, what are you talking about? You've already seen it. He's like, yeah, I think a couple times. The first time was with you. What do you mean the first time you saw this movie was with me? And he's like, yeah, I remember at so-and-so's house, you guys put it on. And I was like, oh my God. this is pre-pandemic. So I'm hoping he was a freshman in high school when this happened, because I
Right.
don't recall. And the friend's mom was also at the house, and we were like, let's have a movie night. Like, let's make dinner and have a movie night, because we had all been hanging out during the day, extended into the night. The only rated R movie this woman watches is The Breakfast Club.
Mm.
And I have to also add, she is very deeply rooted in her religion. She is very much involved in her church. She does not normally watch rated R movies. And however long ago it was, I wasn't thinking, it didn't click, right? And then now I'm watching this movie and I'm like, I can't believe that this is the movie that she's like, this is the only rated R movie I watch. I love this movie so
That's
much.
weird.
It's so funny to me because, even like I said, it's 20 whatever. So if he was a freshman, it was probably 2019. So, we're starting to make those get those conversations. Maybe it was the fall of 2018, but the point is, we were just starting to have those conversations about John Hughes and his canon and the problems with it and etc. And here I am last night thinking, my son's never seen this movie before, but yet he reminded me of this experience that I probably shouldn't have let him have.
So you don't remember like talking to him about, I mean, first of all, before I ask that, like this woman has pretty good taste, honestly, because I feel like I should hate this movie more, but I think it's because the dialogue is really good. The dialogue of this movie is, and the performances, it's good, man. It's just fun. It's interesting. It's not like the other movies either. I mean, it's not like Pretty in Pink. Well, it's not like 16 Candles, but I mean, Pretty in Pink. Anyway, they all have their things, but the dialogue, it's so like, I love plays. I love plays with four people. There's a few like, stage plays that are four people and they're all kind of, like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf or something like that. It's got like that same, well, there's five people in this, but it's got that same kind of vibe. Like, people bouncing off of each other and like really getting energy from each other. And I feel like that's why it's hard to just throw this away, even though there's so many problems with it. There's so many problems. But my question is going to be, so you don't remember, like, you sat there, watched them, like they say so many bad things, sex things, so many bad sex things. Like, and then that whole scene with her panties, like what, one of the things I was thinking too, sorry, I'm really going off, but
that's okay. I love it.
Is they have the scene where Bender's under the table and there's this full on crotch shot and it's supposed to be Molly Ringwald's, ass and, vulva in underwear, like covered in underwear, but still right there, like full screen. And like, she says in the New Yorker article that they had to hire someone over 18 to do that. But like, didn't anyone think about the fact that like it was illegal for them to actually show what they were trying to show? Like, it would have, if they had put her actual crotch on the screen, that would have been illegal. Like, didn't anyone think about how like maybe this was like inappropriate? I don't know. To me, but I also think they're trying to like push. Like if you look at teen stuff, like I was thinking about Euphoria, which I don't watch. But I do feel like, they're in Euphoria, like it sounds like the teen characters are like really like provocative. And I think they were trying to be provocative. I don't think they necessarily thought all teens acted like this. I don't know. Well, anyway, you don't remember seeing it with him, so you don't remember like discussing what was said?
After he brought it up, then the memory came back of us being in the apartment and sitting around the room, but I don't remember having a conversation after the fact. And that's not my style, so we must have. I just don't recall it because apparently I'm not good at remembering things. But it was that moment of like, gosh, I wish that I had been more. I think at the time I was more about the bonding moment between the four of us because we had all known each other. Like I had known these people since before my child was born. We didn't really have a lot of opportunity to like create memories like the four of us together because it's like, me and the friend and me and her mom or me and my kid. There wasn't really a whole lot of chances for us to be like a cohesive quad doing things and creating memories together. So I think I was caught up in the moment of like, we're making pizza, we're gonna have movie night and do this like very family oriented thing, the four of us. And
I'm not accusing you of anything.
No,
it's
like,
okay. Now that I'm watching, because like when I watched it the other night, I was like, geez. I mean, it was shocking. Some of it was shocking to me still. And as a 41-year-old woman. So I just felt like who first encountered this movie when I was 7. So I just felt like, wow, it's not like it's been so many years since it was made, and it doesn't feel like old fashioned. That's for sure.
Yeah, John Hughes has that about his style too, though. Like, even though there's like I'm never gonna understand locker room showers in high school movies because that's not part of my high school experience.
Yeah.
But outside of those weird things, for the most part, he totally, I think, nails it on the head. And I think that context of Molly Ringwald writing that article brought context back to a generation, or brought context to a generation who didn't exist at the time, to remind them we didn't have stuff like this when we were your age. Like, you have it now, we did not have it then. And I think that's so important, because when you kind of go back to that, so I struggle with the idea of just looking at everything through a modern lens and that's it, cut and dry, black and white, there's no wiggle room. Because you have, like, there's a reason why these things started existing. There's a reason why, they were innovative at the time. I cannot tell you how many articles that were printed at the time, critic reviews, that would praise Hues and say, this is it. Like, he nailed getting that high school nuances, the teen angst, all of it. He nailed it. And there really wasn't a whole lot to compare it to. Now, when you pull up articles of teen movies or whatever, there's tons of stuff to reference to, and whether or not it's good or bad or indifferent. And we forget 30 something years ago that, well, I guess it's more than 30 something years ago now, it's probably closer to 40 years ago, almost 40, as close, but almost. It didn't happen then. And it's easy for my son's generation to not know that, because what are their parents doing, trying to survive? They don't have time to like be obsessed with entertainment or know the history of entertainment or be in touch with those things anymore. So that's part of the reason why I was like, when we pull movie reviews, we have to pull from the era, so that way we bring that context back, because it's easy to get sucked in. Like, the whole time I'm watching it last night, I'm like, this feels icky, but the payoff of the end of the film still feels good, right? Like, you still get, there's still the payoff. There's still all of the things that you want in a movie that feels good, minus Bender having his issues, minus, well, the principal is the obvious, villain, but still, with all of its flaws, you still have the payoff, and you still walk away kind of feeling like, I enjoyed that movie.
I mean, I don't know. I don't agree with, like, I think that the way that the movie tied up is really probably one of the things that makes it the most, like, well, a lot of it didn't age well, we're saying, but like, I think would be more interest, like, is like the least nuanced of the whole movie, right? And it's literally because I paused to see like how many more minutes are left from the moment where, Molly Ringwald like gives Ali Sheedy a makeover, and she comes out, and like all that. And it is 5 minutes of a like 1 hour, 40-minute movie. So it's like, I feel like everything else that happens in that movie is a lot more interesting than what happens in the last 5 minutes, which is definitely, when I was a kid, not the way I felt. Like, it made total sense to me that they got together. And now like, it doesn't really. I mean, I feel Emilio Esteves and Ali Sheedy getting together is a little bit more okay with me, only because, especially in this viewing, and maybe because I'm just giving Emilio Estevez too much credit, but there is like many moments in the movie. It's not just when she gets the makeover, right? Like, throughout the movie, he seems really like, plugged into her, like paying attention to Ali Sheedy, what she's doing. He seems amused by her. He seems interested in her. He smiles at her a lot. And like, you get the feeling like he is paying attention to her.
Yeah.
And then like, when she like pulls her hair back and has like a different outfit somehow.
Yeah. Right. She was wearing it under her black sweater.
Okay. Yeah. And
that's what I choose to believe. I don't know if that's true.
I mean, like, I felt that more. I felt like that was more okay with me, but maybe I'm just giving him, I feel like, anyway, if we talk about him for a second, like, probably my favorite scene in the movie is actually when he admits what he did to get the detention, which is like torture this poor nerd. Yeah. But like, when he talks about, and of course it's all the dialogue that Hughes wrote, but like, when he talks about how he's not interested in bullying kids, but they're in the locker room, and like, he's like, he, like, he was in the locker room thinking about how his dad would be basically proud of him if he bullied this kid, or like, you know, how he feels like he's falling short of like his dad's shenanigans when his dad was in high school. And all of a sudden he's violently attacking this other kid. And I feel like that is really, that felt really deep. And like that, it's like, yeah, why are people cruel to other people? Because it's not just kids who are cruel. Like all throughout adulthood, people are cruel. And like, why? You know, it's not necessarily because they're just bad people. So anyway, that's how I feel about that. Sorry, I don't know how I got on that tangent.
That's okay. I appreciate it, because I forgot how it felt very much that he was very sincere in his regret and behaving that way. And I just really loved that, because, you know, Brian's sitting over there like, that was you, like shocked, that like
scared, kind of like, whoa, kind of scared of him now.
Yeah. And and you don't really get to see that vulnerability a lot in men either. We don't really see that as much. So, hey friends, did you know that I have spoken about representation in media and literature other than just on the podcast? I've been booked to speak at company meetings, panel discussions, voiceovers for commercials and video narratives, and to moderate discussion panels. To learn more about how you can book me for an event, just shoot me an email, popculturemakesmejealous@gmail.com. Use speaking engagement as the subject line. Looking forward to working with you. In a 2021 interview with Vogue magazine, Molly Ringwald once again revisits her experience with the three most important films of her career: 16 Candles, Breakfast Club, and Pretty in Pink. When asked if her relationship has changed over time, she replied, quote, "I recognize that those films are so meaningful for generations of people. I feel very protective of them, but at the same time, I also have a complicated feelings towards them. I definitely feel like they're flawed, and there are things I don't like about them. The lack of diversity in particular always bothers me. I'm more conflicted about The Breakfast Club and 16 Candles than Pretty in Pink, which I feel is actually the least problematic of the three. But I would say overall that I feel very loving and nostalgic towards the films I made with John. They occupy an important part of my life," end quote. And I feel like we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but do you think this movie would hold up today if it were released now?
What do you think? I have trouble with this question. Like, if it were released as is, there are a lot of movies still with all white casts. And so, yeah, what do you think?
I think they'd have to, I think the concept could still exist. You know, that idea of detention all day. Again, by the time I was in high school in the late 90s, early 2000s, you could do your homework in detention. It wasn't like you have to sit there and think about it, because that happens in Freaks and Geeks too, where you're not allowed to do anything in detention. It's so foreign to me. But I definitely think if they tried to release a movie based in Chicago or the Chicago region, people would pitch a fit about lack of diversity, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've listened to it, but in a few episodes ago, my friend and I did a conversation about Moxie, and they placed it in the Pacific Northwest. And if you look at ratios or statistics, the cast of Moxie was more diverse in percentage, in that ratio percentage, than all of the Pacific Northwest in general.
Yeah.
So it was like that moment of like, okay, listen, we want representation, but also no, like, you did this weird, this feels awkward. I would be interested to see if somebody could update it, not necessarily call it The Breakfast Club, and not do the garbage that they did to She's All That by making He's All That, but keeping in line. I regret watching that movie so bad. Like, I want that time back. But just, it'd be interesting to see how it would look, one, in a 2020, not just through a 2020 lens, but with like the technology that we have now. Because I think what makes this movie work so well is that you can't be there was no cell phones.
Yeah.
They didn't have like the computer,
and it's
technology.
like they're not, now, like, it, even if they took their cell phones away during detention, like, there would still be, they would be missing it, or they didn't have like the concept of like being connected in that way, which I really enjoyed as an old person. But the other, like, I think what you'd have to do now too is not I really don't know, so I might be over assuming, but I bet you it was an all white crew as well. Like it's all
probably.
white writers, and so I don't think you just fix this by having the actors be more diverse, because the story would need to be more like, for example, like if the principal was, you know, Black or not white, or, you know, well, that would be two different things. And like, or if like some of the students, or, I mean, obviously, if any of the students were gay or, you know, LGBTQ of any kind, right? And like, or, you know, disabled, or like, there's just so much that happens in a real school that is completely not represented here. Or like if the janitor were, you know, not white, like even the janitor is white in this movie, which is I mean, like, I don't know, that doesn't sound, but you know what I mean?
No,
It's
but
like
I understand what you mean, because
every single role is completely, it's like just a white world.
And do you live in a community where there's only white people? I'm confused.
Right.
Like that's
right.
You know,
Yeah. And I feel like to fix it, or to make like, to fix the diversity issue would have just been more than casting. And I think like, I don't know what John Hughes was like as a collaborator, if he ever had a chance to sort of diversify, because it's his story and his storytelling. And I think that's why it's so white. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And, you know, to your point on that, calling back to Moxie, that was the issue. The entire writing team was white. So when you have an entire white writing room, try to make a diverse film, it like they missed it. They missed the mark, you know. And when you look at the writers on who were worked on that movie, you're like, I know you have Black friends that you could have called. Like, you've worked with them in the past. Why didn't you work with them on this? And it would be interesting if and like you said, I don't know about John Hughes' writing style and his collaboration and whatnot, but it would be interesting to bring, like, it's his experience, but then also maybe somebody else comes in and shares their experience, and they figure out how to marry the two to tell this story.
Yeah. And I think like one of the things I really liked about yet another thing, that Molly Ringwald New Yorker piece is very good, but like there's a part toward like, you know, the bottom third where she talks about like somebody who's Black and gay stopping her at a party like recently and telling her how much Breakfast Club meant to them. And she was like, why? Like, there's no representation of you in any way. And he was like, it's the alienation of the characters that really spoke to me. So I think like there is something in, and I, you know, when I watched this movie, like, my neighbor was not white. And like, she seemed to really like, she loved this movie and she really identified with it as well. And like, so I feel like there's something there about the universality of like feeling isolated and teen angst, and that it just could, obviously it wasn't, but it could be more inclusive of lots of different types of teens.
But I like what you have to say, because about, you know, the relating to something and feeling bonded to something beyond just character appearance, because that's, you know, that was a lot of how I had to watch television. You know, I didn't see my family represented in any way, shape, or form on TV. You know, and so it's same with books, same with dolls, all of it. So, you know, you have to start to think about like, okay, so what is it about this movie that feels relatable to me? And you sort of train yourself to think that way, and you don't realize that you're doing it, and then it becomes second nature. And then you know, in your example with Molly Ringwald encountering that person, it's a lot of what the Black community had to do. And I can't speak for any other community because I'm not a part of those communities, but in reference to the Black community, it's a lot of like, you know, I can relate to this character because alienation and, you know, maybe emotional abuse from my parent or whatever it is. And not necessarily the breakdown of the socioeconomic or being a sporto, or I don't know.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, my experience growing up was, I didn't question, I mean, it was so much more homogenous, like the media that I consumed in the 80s and 90s, like, and especially in the 80s though, I feel like it was just like so many like stories of white people and being white, like I never really noticed. And then like it took a while until I was older to kind of think, even though, like in real life, I had mostly BIPOC friends, but because of the part of LA I grew up in too, you know, was, you know, diverse, but yeah, of course, like the media I was consuming magazines, magazines were so white, all the models were white and all the celebrities they were covering too. And like, I think, yeah, that is a real, when you talked about like what mark this movie left on me, it's like the gender politics for sure. And then also like, just like not questioning why this, at the time, not questioning at all, like how every single person could be white in a movie.
Yeah.
Never occurred to me.
Yeah, as I've embarked on this season of the show, because we're looking at a lot of high school movies, I'm realizing how much of my identity has been shaped by these strong female characters that exist. And in some ways, Claire, you could argue whatever way you want about Claire, but at the end of the day, like, she is who she is. But in other respects too, like in other movies, there's all these really like just the commentary about gender in general. I'm realizing that really heavily influenced my position and being very much in the camp of like, hey guys, equity is a good thing.
Yeah.
Also don't treat me like shit because I'm a woman.
Yeah.
And you don't always think about that either, and how that influences you. And there's a lot of that in the 90s for sure, where you have these really strong female characters, but they're painted in this lens of like being an agitator or a man hater or what have you. Fast forward 20-30 years and you're like, no, she was awesome. And just the way that they sort of handled it maybe wasn't the best, but they still gave us this like character that we could be like, she's a badass, let's be more like her.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, I feel like Claire to me is like, I wonder how much teen girls have changed, like in the way they relate to boys, honestly, because she's so ashamed, and she's so easily shamed and teased. I mean, Bender's doing more than teasing, but like, but yeah, and I just wonder like how much, I don't know. I was thinking about actually a book that came to mind. This is like one of the only YA books I've read in like the last 15 years, but I read the Divergent series. Have you ever, or watched those movies? I really liked that female character. The main character is a girl. But like one thing I really liked about it was, when she starts to, fall in love with the main guy in the book, she still has her own life. Like she really does, like, not just like, oh, she kind of works her life in around this crush and this romance. Like she has her whole own thing. She has her own problems. She has her own thing she's trying to do. There's one scene in the book where she like jumps off a building because all the Dauntless do that together. And I'm only bringing this up because even reading it as like a 39-year-old, I read it like a couple of years ago, like her crush, whose name is Four, like he's afraid of heights. That's like a big part of the plot. And so he doesn't go to the top of the building and jump off. And she fucking goes anyway. Like, she's like, okay, well, I'll see you back at the like weird hole that we live in. And like, but I'm going to go jump off this building with my friends. And she doesn't not go, and he's not upset about it. And I felt like, wow, now that is something Claire would never do if she was in a dystopian novel in the 80s. She would never like go live her own life, and like, so I do think like there's progress with some female characters that's like really significant and meaningful to me as someone who like I didn't have any role model like that for sure. But in a lot of other ways, I think like a lot of girls, especially with like Instagram and, well, they're not even on Instagram anymore, whatever apps they're on that I don't even know about because I'm too old. It's all about image and like how they look and what boys are thinking about how they look. I wonder. So.
But now also you gave me the idea that we need to start writing dystopian novels set in the 80s with strong female leads.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah.
As you're talking, I'm thinking, dystopian novels. I'm thinking of all the dystopian novels I read in, that were released between like 1960 whatever to like 1999. And I'm just like, I think we need some girls up in here being like badass in dystopia.
Yeah, there's a lot of other problems with those books, but I felt like, I just brought it up because like, I remember as I was reading the scene, having this realization, like, wow, like, that's great. Like I don't think the author, like that comes from the author, I don't think she, like, that was just natural to her to write a female character who isn't like is obsessed with her crush, of course, because she's a teenager, but has like this whole other thing that she's doing. I just thought it was awesome.
Yeah. I haven't read the series, but my son did, and we did go see the movies when they were released, and I did enjoy the movies, but now I'm like, do I read the books? Because then I'll become that person, but then I do because I have this whole thing about book to screen adaptations and like how to do it without losing the integrity of the book, because that happens so often. And so I'm like, do I want to go down that road divergence?
Well, their romance is a lot better in the book. But another reason I thought of this book, when it has like a slight connection to the Breakfast Club, like as slight as possible, but like the whole thing is there's these factions, right? And so there's Dauntless and there's Abnegation and Amity, or what, everybody fits into one, and the main character is Divergent. She fits them all, right? It's not that she doesn't fit into any, it's like she's all of them. And that's how the Breakfast Club ends too, with like the essay that Brian writes where he says, we're all a brain, we're all a basket case, we're all a jock, we're all like, we're not just fitting into our roles, we're all these things. And I think like, that's kind of interesting that like that theme, because like, when you're an adult too, like you kind of give up, you're just like, okay, this is my life. I mean, not all adults give up, not all the time, but you're like, this is you kind of like fit in a box, and like then you're kind of like working out, do I fit here? And like it's kind of lifelong. It's not just when you're a teen,
Absolutely. I'm definitely going through that now, because I'm thinking, who am I without a child in the house? Like, what does that even mean? What does it even look like? And we don't really have a lot of that represented in pop culture, and how to navigate that. And I realize how much of a crutch I use for television and movies to sort of help me figure out how I feel. Not to tell me how I feel, but sort of to help me like realize like, oh yeah, I feel that. I understand that. I relate to that scenario that's happening, that kind of stuff. And
interesting.
We don't have a ton of that. Actually, the solo mom trope in pop culture is really upsetting, but we don't have, this is not
and one-dimensional. And empty nesters, it's very flat. Like not a lot of nuance there.
What's interesting to me is this conversation between, again, this battle between youth and experience, because as I'm getting closer and closer to 40, I'm not competing, but the pool has more and more college graduates who are probably went to high school with my kid, and I'm feeling that pressure of like, am I still going to get an opportunity, because now I'm competing with somebody who might be young and fresh and hot. But then when I see younger people speak on the internet and talk about like, thank you for highlighting this young person, we don't get any credit, and I'm just like, well, who's getting all the credit then? Because I'm pushing 40, and I still feel like I have not had like the heyday that we're told we're supposed to have.
Right. Yeah. I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah. To say I wasn't impacted by John Hughes's work would be a lie, but to echo Molly Ringwald's sentiment, I have complicated feelings towards this movie. Maggie, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you share with our friends at home where they can catch you if they want to keep up with you online?
Oh, yes. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I am on Instagram, Maggie Frank HSU, and that's my website too, MaggieFrankHSU.com.
Nice. And friends will link in the show notes, so that way you can take a look at her website and see the freebie offer that she has and all of that fun stuff. If you love our show and want to support it, there's a few ways that you can do that. Become a supporter on Patreon for $10 a month to receive ad-free episodes with bonus content, or you can write a review or rate the podcast wherever you find your podcasts. And if neither of those are your style, you can find us on Instagram. Give us a follow and share your video clips with your friends. We are on IG as Pop Culture Makes Me Jealous. Thanks for tuning in, y'all.